Last week, Russian forces captured the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Now, that's the site of the meltdown back in 1986. Radiation levels spiked after the tanks and troops kicked up clouds of radioactive dust. Levels have since returned to normal, but there is now concern over the greater risk posed to Ukraine's active nuclear power reactors. It's an unprecedented situation in history, a nation with a major nuclear power program finding itself in the middle of a war. Ukraine is dependent on nuclear power and operates one of the world's largest nuclear networks. It runs 4 power plants with a total of 15 reactors. As the front line of the fighting edges closer to these sites, there are worries that one of them could get caught in the crossfire and spark yet another nuclear disaster. And we certainly hope that doesn't happen, but the risk is real. Shaun Burnie, he is a senior nuclear specialist with Greenpeace. He joins me now from Scotland. Shaun, it's good to have you on the program. We just heard the director of the IAEA describe this as a unique situation, a war taking place in a region with a huge nuclear power program and network. So how high is the chance that we might see a nuclear accident as a result of this war?
Well, of course, it's impossible to say what the probability is because of the situation in this terrible war in Ukraine. What we do know is that nuclear installations in Ukraine, nuclear power plants, are extremely vulnerable. These are very complex systems. They're dependent, particularly for electricity, from the nation's grid. And that's one of our major concerns, that in the event of grid instability or damage to the local electricity supply, the reactors, and here particularly we're concerned about Zaporizhzhia in southern Ukraine, that those reactors would be dependent upon their emergency diesel generators. And there's major questions over diesel generators, their ability to operate, how much fuel they have. And at Zaporizhzhia, there's been questions over the last years about the reliability of those. The problem then becomes that you've got these massive reactors. There's currently 3 out of the 6 operating at Zaporizhzhia. That there's enormous heat that needs to be cooled. And without the electricity supply, you soon run out the ability to cool your reactor core and the spent fuel pools, which is where hundreds of tons of highly radioactive and hot spent fuel is stored. And that's really the sort of, some of the scenarios that we can look at are truly frightening.
And Shaun, what is the most likely cause of an accident? I mean, is it a cyber attack on the power grid that you're talking about, or would it be a direct hit by a missile? I mean, I'm thinking about after the 9/11 attacks, there was a lot of concern that terrorists could fly an airplane into one of the reactors.
Well, there's so many, of course, unknowns about this terrible situation. It makes no logical sense for anyone to fire a tank round or a missile into a nuclear reactor. No nuclear power plant has been designed to withstand an armed military attack of missiles and tank rounds. But an accident is one more likely scenarios rather than a deliberate attack. And as we've seen, the predictability of where Russia fires its missiles, its tank rounds, they're not particularly accurate. The more concerning is the effect it would have if maybe tens of kilometers away there was some damage to the local grid supply, at which point the emergency diesel generators have to kick in. And that's when you get the potential of some serious events.
I want to show you just briefly footage from Ukraine from today. Nuclear power plant workers blocking the road to the city where the Zaporizhzhia atomic power plant is located. Now, they're blocking the road, trying to keep Russian troops from advancing. The plant there, one of the biggest nuclear sites in Europe. I mean, this is a sign, isn't it, that people on the ground are worried about the situation, about an accident happening.
Well, Greenpeace today issued its report on the situation in Ukraine with regard to nuclear power plant vulnerability, and we explicitly said that we deeply respect the commitment of the workers at Ukrainian nuclear power plants who are under unbearable circumstances. If you can imagine, there's wars raging in your immediate vicinity, and you are absolutely dedicated to keeping that plant as safe as possible. and the people of the community is Erno Hodar, which is within 6 to 10 kilometers of the nuclear plant. So it's a terrible, terrible situation. And really, there is no way you can secure the safety of these nuclear power plants from military attack unless the war is stopped. So it's another of many, many reasons why this invasion, this military adventure from Putin has to end immediately.
Yeah, an excellent argument for peace. Shaun Burnie with Greenpeace. Shaun, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights about a situation that is dangerous and fluid. Thank you. When Russia invaded Ukraine last week, experts worried that cyber attackers would wreak havoc, but that has not happened yet. Ukraine's Defense Council says the number of cyber attacks has gone up significantly, but it's less than expected. Internet giants such as Microsoft, they've also helped repel attackers. Meanwhile, hackers around the world, including the Anonymous Collective, have declared cyber war against Russia. Well, from Washington, D.C., I'm now joined by Dmitry Alperovich. He's a computer security industry executive. He's co-founder of the cybersecurity company CrowdStrike. Dmitry, it's good to have you on the program. Are you surprised that we have not seen big cyber attacks connected to the war in Ukraine so far?
I'm actually not. It's important to understand that cyber is a great tool for gray zone conflict, that area between peace and war. Once you're in actual warfare, that's when kinetic destruction and bombing and artillery and ground forces that the Russians are bringing to bear on the Ukrainians, that's when they take over. That's when they have a huge advantage. And cyber really plays a much more secondary role, if at any at all. So I'm not surprised that the Russians have not used much of cyber against Ukraine so far.
Okay, so you say we're still more in this kinetic warfare. There's also reports, though, that the Russian military is frustrated that they have not been able to advance as quickly or as far as they would have liked in the first week. There are concerns about the state of mind of Vladimir Putin. When you put all of these together, isn't this fertile ground then for a leader to call in his cyber warriors to launch an attack?
I don't think so. I don't think that cyber will have significant role in actually suppressing Ukrainian defenses. They're going to have to make more progress on the ground if they're going to succeed in surrounding Kiev and actually trying to change the government. However, I think it's important to understand that they've made a lot of progress, particularly in the south. They've moved 300 kilometers from Crimea to Mariupol. They moved to Mykolaiv, which is another 300 kilometers towards the east. That's a pretty rapid pace of advance. If you compare it to U.S. invasion of Iraq, it took us 2 weeks to get to Baghdad, about 550 kilometers. They've been able to do this in 5 days. So yes, they've stalled a little bit in the northern side of the Ukrainian conflict, but in the south, they've made a lot of progress.
U.S. President Biden and other Western leaders, they've said that they will not send NATO troops to fight in Ukraine. But can you imagine a scenario where a cyber attack could force them to change their mind?
You know, this is one of the things I worry a lot about. I don't expect a lot of cyber activity in Ukraine itself, but I do think that the Russians are likely to retaliate both against Europe and the United States through cyber means, in part to strike back at the very harsh sanctions that have been imposed on the Russian economy for this egregious invasion. And that's when we have a danger of a tit-for-tat escalation in cyberspace between the U.S. and Russia, escalating into more of a kinetic conflict. If you can foresee a situation where Russia hits our critical infrastructure, our financial industry, our energy industry, and then the U.S. retaliates, it's unlikely to stay just in cyberspace.
Yeah, I was talking to people today here in Berlin. There's concern that Berlin's power and water supplies would be a target, a cyber target, if Russia indeed decided to move beyond Ukraine in this war. What would be your advice? How should the Berlin government, how should Western governments, how should they be working right now to repel a cyber attack from Russia?
Well, first of all, they should have started this months ago, because if you haven't done anything up till now, it's really too late to beef up defenses. You can't do this overnight. But ideally, they've been doing what the U.S. government has been doing, which is a program that they called Shields Up, reaching out to industry, particularly in the critical infrastructure sectors, to share intelligence about what the Russian tradecraft is like in cyberspace, what they should be prepared for, telling them to be at the highest possible state of alert.
Dmitry Alperovich with CrowdStrike. Dmitry, we appreciate your time, and we appreciate you shedding some insight on this situation that the whole world is talking about right now. Thank you.
Thank you.